Linda Debe is an experienced genealogy speaker with over 40 years in the field, specializing in Native American research to honor her late father, a tribal elder of the Fond Du Lac Reservation in Cloquet, Minnesota. She enjoys sharing her knowledge on Native American records and tribal history. Linda holds an AAS in electronics technology from the United States Air Force and will graduate from the International Institute of Genealogical Studies in 2025. Certified in Microsoft Access and Excel, she also creates automated research tools to improve efficiency. Currently, she serves as the program chair for the North Hills Genealogists in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and will lead their new Technology to the Rescue Special Interest Group, or SIG, beginning in January of 2025. Linda shares her expertise on her YouTube channel and manages a free Google Calendar of genealogical education events nationwide, accessible at thesleeplessgenealogist.com. Help me in welcoming Linda Debe to the Georgia Archives. It's working, yes, ma'am.
Hello, and thank you for coming. So what I have on the slide here is how you say hello in Anishinaabe, and it is bonjour. And they kind of got it from the French, bonjour. But that's how most Chippewas say hello is bonjour. And then I just added, being it is Native American History Month, I just added several interesting facts about Native American heritage. And I found it very interesting that in 1914, they only had one day for Native American history. And now we have a month. It's still not enough, but we're getting better. And then it happened in 1990 when George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, designated November as the National Heritage Month. Figure out which way it goes. It should be that one. It's that one. My battery may have died. So.
What's that battery, is it?
It's a AAA. Did we connect it?
I did. It connected in the. 1914 was that battery.
I can just use it as a pointer and I can just hit enter. Yeah. Yeah, I'll just use that.
It's working now. Looks like it's working now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yes, sir. There we go. So today we're going to talk about the various roles used in Native American genealogy. And when you talk about roles, the biggest one that we all hear about is the Dawes rolls. And that's the one that the Cherokee used to verify if you can join the tribe. Now, when I do my Native American talks, I tell people this is not a way for me to teach you how to become a member of the tribe. This is a way for me to teach you how to use the records to prove those stories that somebody was or was not part of a specific tribe. Now, there's numerous amounts of roles. They have annuity rolls, they have judgment rolls, and there were even yearly census rolls. But we're going to talk about the other roles similar to the Dawes rolls, where the government started tracking people for specific reasons. So we are going to learn about those various roles that the government created. We'll be able to identify which roles affected which tribes, because not every tribe was on every role. So as with the Dawes rolls, and I believe I was talking about this at lunch, my father being from the Chippewa tribe in Minnesota, none of his people, none of his ancestors are on the Dawes rolls because the Dawes rolls was only for 5 tribes. And there are more than 574 recognized tribes and numerous more that are not recognized. And many of them, if they were not from this eastern area of the United States, are not going to be on the Dawes rolls. And then we're going to understand where and how to find these rolls so that we can start finding our ancestors. Now, what I want to talk about are a couple of definitions, because as you go through these roles, you're going to find words, and we want to know what those words meant at that time. They may be something different now as a meaning, but we want to know what they were on the roles that we're looking at. First one is court of claims, and that's just where the claims against the government are heard. So regular court like we have today, but you will see on some roles, this role was created because of the court of claims. And so there was somebody who went to the government and put in a claim, and then they created this role. And then there's enrollment. With enrollment, it's a way the government documented the Native Americans. It's also what the tribes used to identify the people that belong to the tribe for their annuities of their land. So when they started passing out the allotments of the land, they needed to know the roles to know who to give the land to. And of course, rolls, that's the list of Native people that the government collected for various reasons, for removal, for payments, and then the tribe also kept these rolls to know who was actually enrolled in their tribe and belonged to that particular tribe. Ratified, we heard earlier about the treaties, and some of the treaties were ratified and some were not. And ratified is where the government or the state officially approved the terms of the treaty. So if you're looking at a treaty that has not been ratified, it means that the state did not approve the terms of the treaty. Now, there is a website that you can go to that lists all of the treaties, and it's Digi, D-I-G-I, treaties, plural.com. And I use this in my course that I'm teaching, and everybody is loving it because you can go out there and you can search by Native American tribe. You can search by a year. You can search by numerous keywords, search features to pull up all of the treaties and actually go in and read about the treaties. So it's really a cool site. And then freedmen. Freedmen, it was a person who had been freed from slavery, usually by legal means. The free men and women who were once enslaved citizens of the 5 civilized tribes, which are the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, and Choctaw. And then mulatto, you'll see that on a lot of census rolls, meaning they were of mixed blood. They could have been African American and Indian. They could have been African American and white. They could have been white and Indian. But they were some sort of mixed race, and the government used the word mulatto to describe them. So the list of roles that the government has done are vast. These are just a few of the roles that I have discovered, and we'll talk about a few of them today, but these are by far not the only roles out there. And you'll notice I don't even have the Dawes roles on here because everybody talks about the Dawes roles, and I want to bring attention to the ones that are not the Dawes roles. So there's the Armstrong roll of 1830, which covered the Choctaw. There was the Hester roll of 1883, which covered the Cherokee. Then there was the Wallace roll of 1890 to 1896, which also covered the Cherokee. Oh, I did have the Dawes rolls on here. That was from 1896, and that covered those 5 civilized tribes. Then there was the Ken Clifton roll of 1897. That covered the Cherokee freedmen, which were slaves that were released, whether they were Indian slaves or African-American slaves or even white slaves. If they were freedmen, they should be on that Ken Clifton roll if they were from that area at that time. Then there's the Guion Miller roll, 1906 to 1911, which covered the Eastern Cherokee. And then the Baker roll of 1908 to 1910, which also covered the Eastern Cherokee. And then the Roblin roll from 1911 to 1919, which covered Washington state tribes. So see, not all the rolls were from the Eastern region of the United States. And there are other rolls. These are just some of the ones that I found to talk to you about and show you how many rolls there are besides the Dawes rolls. So if we look at the Armstrong rolls, this is the treaty with the Choctaws of 1830. That's the cover page of it. This was a census for the Choctaws who were in Mississippi, and they owned farmland. And this treaty that you see here, my point, did the wrong thing. The treaty right here, I don't know how to operate this thing. Pictured here is the Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek. And that was signed on the 27th of September of 1830. And it was part of the Removal Act of 1830. And I did get this information off of the Digitreaties. It's digitreaties.org. My apologies, it is not .com. And what this treaty required the Choctaw to do was to give up their lands east of the Mississippi. And they moved to a small tract of land west of the Mississippi near Fort Smith, Arkansas. And this is a picture of the left side of the Armstrong roll. And as you can see, it has the person's name. That first line is William Milton. And it tells you how many acres he had cultivated, how many people were in the family, how many males over 16, and how many males and females under 10 years of age. So it gives us a little bit of an idea of what his family unit looked like.
Looks like this is.
Yeah,
I guess the first letter doesn't look like the W.
You're right. It does say Mrs. Wilson.
So female.
Female, right. So this is her family, which the first question as a genealogist that comes to my mind, if she's Mrs. Wilson, where's her husband? Was he Native American? Was he white? I would have to do research on this Mrs. Wilson, find out what her first name is, and find out a little bit about her husband to determine those questions. But that, as a genealogist thinking, that's the first question I have when I look at this.
Now,
Uh-huh.
she could have been a widow, but would that have been included?
It could have been, she could have been a widow. It's not included on this particular roll, but doing research would also help me determine if she were a widow. Absolutely. So here it says, it tells you the location of the land, and it's Robinson Road. Is that what it says? Yeah, Robinson Road, the north side of Robinson Road. So if you're into maps, you can get a picture of this area and find Robinson Road and find the north side, and then you kind of have an idea of where that land was that Mrs. Robinson owned. And then it shows general notes, and it says 640. I'm not quite sure what that 640 means, but it's interesting that each one is a different number there.
Well, 640 acres is a square mile.
Yeah. So, but it's going to give you different pieces of information for different people, and it's going to give you more information about your family. And then we have the Hester rolls from 1883. This was for Cherokees. And this is a census of the Cherokee in North Carolina who qualified for certain entitlements and benefits. And it references the earlier enrollments, and these I didn't even talk about earlier, the Moulet, the Seiler, the Chapman, and the Swetland. So there are 4 more rolls that we can add to our list to find out what those rolls are and why they were created, to understand how the Hester rolls came about. And this was based off of the authority of an act of Congress in 1882. Now, I highlighted act because, as we learned in the prior presentation, in 1871, there were no longer any treaties made with the Native Americans. They made them acts. So they just changed the name. So now if you see it's an act and it's after 1871, or excuse me, if you see anything after 1871, it should be an act. Prior to 1871, it would be a treaty. And this was approved by the Commissioner of Indian Affairs on January 24th of 1884. And this was for the main settlement of the Cherokee on the Qualla boundary in western North Carolina. The roll also denotes Cherokee residing in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, South Carolina, Kentucky, New Jersey, Virginia, Illinois, Kansas, Colorado, and California. So even if you had somebody who was Native American and they lived in California around the 1880s, they may be on this roll. This is just a picture of what the Hester roll looks like. I like this one because it's typed. You can read it a little easier. But again, it gives us their number on the Hester roll on the far left. It gives their Indian name. It gives their English name. So now you're going to possibly have both. And you do need to search for both when you're looking for your ancestors, because they may be listed in records with their Indian name, and they could be listed in the records with their American name. You'll see their relationship, their age, and their ancestor on the previous roll. So now we're starting to build out a family. This first line, Melissa, her ancestor on the previous rolls was Rebecca Coast, and the knee, it gives me her maiden name. Is that Nappy? Happy? So it gives you a family information so that you can now try to do further research and go backwards. And then this is continuing. This roll is very long. So on the other side of it, here it's going to list, we've got the ancestor on the previous roll, the latest spelling, because in genealogy, we know spelling didn't matter. It was how it sounded. And you have to understand, if you've got somebody who is of German descent and they are hearing somebody with French background, they're going to spell it differently than a Frenchman would. So it's how it sounded. My name, for example, Debe, I've seen it in the records as Dippy, D-I-P-P-I. I've seen it as Dibby, D-I-B-B-I, and with one P and one I, and with E's in there. So it's spelled numerous ways, but I have to understand my ancestors were German, and he spoke with a very thick German accent. So when he spoke to somebody, Debe in a German thick accent might sound like Dippy or Dibby. So that's where those spelling variations come from. But this tells you that the first person, they lived on Shooting Creek in Clay County, North Carolina. So now I have a generalized location. I can go start looking in those records to find more information about Melissa. Then we have the Wallace rolls, 1890 to 1896. These are also for the Cherokee. And a treaty was why the Wallace rolls came about. And this includes authenticated freedmen, admitted freedmen, and those who died between 1883 and 1890, and freed Negro associated with the tribe. And there are over 3,800 Cherokee freedmen on this record, on this roll, and they were supposed to share $75,000 from the government. But the Wallace rolls were considered fraudulent in 1895 by the Court of Indian Affairs. They said something's wrong with this roll. It's no good. But the roll still has pertinent information. It can still be considered fraudulent, but it's going to have pertinent information. It was based off the Reconstruction Treaty of 1866. And what it did was it voided the prior treaty of 1861. And that treaty from 1861 was with the Confederate States, and it gave Native Americans amnesty for prior crimes before 1866. And the Cherokee agreed to give up land in Kansas originally sold to them by the U.S. So the U.S. made a treaty, sold land in Kansas to the Cherokee, and then they went and made another treaty and they took the land back. And then they sell the lands that they owned in Mississippi and Arkansas if approved by the Secretary of the Interior. So we're going around in circles with these treaties, and you have to kind of keep it straight in your brain. So timelines are a great thing to do that with. So I'd recommend, if you're doing genealogy research, start those timelines, because you're going to be going around in circles and back and forth to try to keep everything straight. And on Ancestry, they have an index for the Wallace rolls. And this is an Ancestry screenshot. So you see the last name Smith. It tells his office number. It tells you his Wallace roll number. It tells you his Cherokee number. It tells you his first name and his age. Those other numbers are going to help you find him on other records. Yes. And there are two other websites that you can go to, especially if you're researching Cherokee. One is allthingscherokee.com, and the other one is accessgenealogy.com. They have these records as well. And on one of them, when you go to the Wallace rolls, it will show the Wallace rolls, and it will show another roll, and you can link it. So when you click on the link to the other roll, it takes you to his same record. So it's really a nice thing that they've done on Access Genealogy and/or All Things Cherokee. So I use all three, but what you have to understand in genealogy, we want to get back to the original record. So you want to go to the National Archives to see the original record. You don't want to go just based off of what the index says, because somebody could have transcribed that index incorrectly. So you always want to find that original record. Yes,
So
ma'am.
those three sites were the allthingscherokee.com.
And accessgenealogy.com. And so when I opened up that first one where it says view record over there on the left, this is the information that I got. Well, it's kind of the same information that goes across, but it gives me some different information. There's the number on the Clifton roll, 1,000. But on the Wallace roll, they're 1,286. So I should be able to go to the Clifton roll to the number 1,000, and I should find Maria Smith, because it's cross-referencing her on several different rolls. It tells me down here that she's formerly Thompson. So as a genealogist, that tells me that's either her maiden name or a prior married name. Now I have to do some more research. And it says that she is an authenticated freedman. And so we also, with the Wallace rolls, because they deemed it null and void, we want to check the Kearns-Clifton roll, because the Kearns-Clifton roll was the one they came out with to override the Wallace roll. And here we go with the Kern Clifton roll. So we're going to go right into the records that replace the Wallace roll. This is the front cover of the Kern Clifton roll of the Cherokee Freedmen. It was approved in January 16th of 1887, and it is for the Cherokee Freedmen. And it is the census of the freedmen of the Cherokee Nation. Again, it includes those emissions from the Wallace roll. And it's arranged in two different sections. You've got authenticated and contesting or admitted freedmen and their descendants and family groups. They're all listed together. But there is no apparent pattern to the order of the listing. So this is one of those records that you may have to go page by page to find, unless you go to Access Genealogy or All Things Cherokee and try to find the index where they may cross-reference those numbers for you. And this is what the Kearns Clifton rolls look like. Doesn't give us a whole lot of information. So go back to that. Yeah, so we don't get a lot of information, and I believe this was from the archives. So this is what I found in the National Archives. You go to All Things All Things Cherokee and Access Genealogy, and you may get a couple of extra pieces in their indexes of information on this. Now, the Guion Miller rolls, 1906 to 1911. And we talked a little bit last hour about linguistics and language. So I put the Guion in Google Translate because I've heard it pronounced several different ways. The English version is Guion. That's how the English pronounce that, Guion. I scratch my head and I go, oh, no. So I put it in as a French, a translation to French, and it's Guion. And so when I see that, I immediately know French, I'm going to say Guion Miller. But if you're English, you may read that as the way the English do and call it Guion, and you'll hear people say both ways. Now, the Guion Miller rolls, it was for people applying for compensation in the judgment of the U.S. Court of Claims from 1906. It had guidelines to be on this roll. You had to be alive by the 28th of May or on the 28th of May of 1906. So if you died on the 27th of May, you should not be on this roll. You had to be alive on the 28th of May. You had to submit an application to get put on this roll, and that needed to be submitted by August of 1907. You had to be a member of the Eastern Cherokee tribe during the treaties of 1835, 1836, and 1845. Now, this is from 1906. So you're looking at people, if you take 1906 and subtract 1835, you're looking at the elders of the tribe that are going to be on here. They could not be affiliated with any other tribe. Now, you may also find descendants, and then the descendants are going to apply. My father was a member of the tribe, member of the tribe, and was there during the treaty of 1835, 36, and 45. But in these applications, it's going to have a load of information that you can find out about your ancestor. And they were forcibly removed to Indian Territory, but these people on the Guion Miller roll were known as the Ross Party. We heard in the last hour about AIM and people fighting against the government for removal. The Ross Party was named after John Ross, and he was a Cherokee chief who fought against the removal. And he helped reestablish the Cherokee national government. But because these people were part of his party and were part of his support system and supported him, they called all the people who had not moved out yet the Ross Party. And those are some of the people that are on this Guion Miller roll. And not everybody who was on this roll was admitted as a member or got compensation, but they had to, because they had to apply. So I could go in and I could apply for this and they could reject me, but my name is still on the roll that I applied and my application is still there with all my family history information. And you can order copies of the Guion Miller roll applications. You have to fill out a NATF-83, and you can get that online at the National Archives. And you fill that out, and then of course you got to pay for the records, but you can get it. But it's one copy of the 83 form for every person that you're looking for. So if you're looking for 5 people, you've got to fill out 5 separate forms. It's not one form for everybody. This is what the Guion Miller rolls look like. So you have their roll number over on the left. You have a little bit of information. So Thomas Hegler and 3 of his children. And he lived in Tennessee, and he was rejected. Neither him nor his ancestors ever enrolled in a tribe. That was one of the guidelines. It says it doesn't establish the fact of descent from a person who was a party to the treaty of 1835 to 36 to 1845. He claims to be a descendant of Garden Green. Does not prove to be a descendant of the Garden Green on the 1835 roll. So they did a lot of research on everybody that applied, and then they were either rejected or admitted. Now the last line, Mary Barnes and her 2 children from Galloway, Georgia, she was admitted. She is the daughter of number 1523. And claims through the same source as 1523. So now we know she's the daughter of the man who's on line, who's got the number 1523.
So the applications are in DC.
You have to go there and look at them or fill out the form. George Wright was her father. And he has 1 child, Galloway, Georgia. His mother enrolled on the Act of Congress roll. There's another roll to add to our list of rolls. The applicant enrolled by the Sweatland, which we heard about earlier, and see the date. So you see how each one of these rolls are going to point you to other rolls and help you find family members and build that tree to prove that Native American descendancy, but not to get you into a tribe. And so I put them together here. Mary Barnes, her father, George Wright, and how they were both able to be admitted on the Guion Miller roll. So now we're going to talk about the U.S. Census. Now I found this picture of this man and the caption on it from the National Archives or from the Library of Congress. It says a man standing in front of a bookshelf which holds volumes related to the 11th census of the United States Census Bureau around 1940. Now, if you do genealogy, you know the 11th census was the 1890 census. And the 1890 census burned. And there is a handful of records for Alabama and a couple of other counties They would, and that happened in 1920s. So there's no way he could be standing in front of a bunch of books from the 1890 census. So I found that interesting. They've either got the caption wrong or he's just standing in front of a bunch of books and they're not the census. But I found that interesting. So the US, and this is a picture of one of the US censuses. So we all know about the census and they're all on Ancestry and Family Search and Internet Archive. They're everywhere. But we don't always talk about the reports that the government made with the census records. So we have all these census records. The government took and compiled all the information and came out with these huge, long reports. So in 1850, the census report, there is the count of various tribes and populations. This is going to help us because if we are told or we discover that our ancestor is of XYZ tribe descendancy, we can go to the 1850 census and see if that tribe was in that area at that time to say, yeah, that's the tribe they're talking about, or no, that's not the tribe. Place and time. If your person's not in the place and time, they're not going to be, you can't prove that that's either one, that's your ancestor, or two, that that's them on that, for that particular tribe. So looking at these reports are really helpful. Boring, but helpful. If you ever have insomnia, pull up a census report. In 1860 census report, a lot of Native Americans denied their tribe. They lived off the reservation and assimilated into the European arena. But they could also be misdiagnosed as being Black, mulatto, enslaved, or free people. But the 1860 report is going to show you the count of the various tribes and the Native American people and how many lived where, which may help you in your research. In 1880, the census report also tracked the Japanese and the Chinese, the Blacks, and the civilized Indians. And they called the civilized Indians the ones that assimilated and took on European tendencies. They wore European clothing, they spoke English, they denounced their tribe, they didn't live on the reservation, they tried to be white, for lack of a better term. And then in 1890, again, the census records burned. The census reports are still out there, and it has an appendix to cover those who lived in Indian Territory, which is Oklahoma, and Alaska. There's over 32,000 people in Alaska. So you might find some information in those reports.
And these are online.
Mm-hmm. They're on the uscensus.gov website. But in the 1900s, this is 1900, Indian population. So in 1900, the government actually did a supplemental Indian population census. On here, it shows the nativity of the parents, kind of what they did on the regular census record, and then they show the nativity of the person that's on that line. Let's see what else it has on there. It gives you their personal description, where they lived, whether they spoke English, their education, different things like that. But it identifies those Native Americans on this particular census schedule population. And here is the continuation of this. So it goes, or the top line is the schedule population, and then underneath for those particular lines, I believe, yeah, under, it shows you what tribe they're from. So that first person, he was Chippewa, his father was Chippewa, and his mother was Chippewa. And it shows if he was mixed blood or not. That's blood quantum. So he was 0 mixed blood, which meant he was full blood. But the person underneath of him was a half mixed blood. So he was half Indian, half something else. It asked if they were taxed, because Indians at some point did not have to pay taxes, or if they, you know, to help become assimilated. So the first guy did not pay taxes, but the second guy did. And then was citizenship assigned by allotment? The second guy was yes, the first guy was no. And then their dwelling, they asked about their dwelling, if it was a fixed dwelling or if it was a portable dwelling. So were they living in a teepee? Were they living in a house? So it asked that kind of information. So it's going to give you a little bit, you know, if it said yes, it was portable or movable, then you might be able to say, okay, well then he didn't live in a house. He lived in a teepee, he lived in a tent, he lived somewhere else. Yes, sir.
You mentioned, lost my train of
The mixed blood?
how they were assigned citizenship.
Oh, yeah, so here it says was citizenship assigned by allotment. So
What did that mean?
when they started getting the land, that's how they determined if they were going to be citizens or not.
So if they didn't get any land, they
Well, the citizenship, they weren't even considered citizens until like 1924. Right. Because of the allotments and the different treaties and acts and things that went on, they could get citizenship through different means. Yeah. I cry sometimes when I read some of this stuff. So in 1910, there's the Indian population schedule again. And down at the bottom, it gives you another place for you to put information on Native Americans. So this first line goes to the first person up there. And it says, graduated from what educational institute? And he says 5 years county school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Makes me think he was probably at one of the Indian schools. So it just gives you that kind of detailed information. It tells you what tribe they are from, whether he's full blood or partial blood. So it gives you a lot of information when you're looking at the federal census to determine if your person may or may not be Native American. In 1920, it also has Indian listed there, here in the middle. It shows their age and their name. And then as you scroll over, you see it's getting kind of hard to read. The Arizona, New Mexico, it kind of tells you where they're from to help you determine possibly what tribe it is.
It doesn't give you a tribe name.
No, it doesn't give you a tribe name, not at all. You'd have to go back to the 1910 to try to see if you can find them and get that tribe name. In 1930, place of birth, first person was born in Utah. He's a full blood and he's a Shoshone. In 1940, there he is again. There's somebody else, Oklahoma, and I believe that top one and the bottom two say Indian, IN. So they are identifying themselves as Native American and where they're from. So you get tidbits of information off of each census. So you have to kind of correlate them all with that, find that same person on all these censuses to correlate everything to put their story together. Now, these examples that I'm showing you are from all different people, all different across the United States, but you find your ancestor and then pull their records on each census.
So you've got the same family and you have one daughter identified as Indian.
And one
Son.
identified as white. But look at their age.
But and the father is
The
Indian.
father is
but-
Indian, the mother is white. The first daughter is white. So what that would tell me is if they're not counting her as Native American, either she didn't look Native American or she may not be the daughter of this father.
Yeah, and I wondered when they did the census, they probably didn't allow the people to make their own identification.
Well, this one in 1940, they did. You see the little plus after the
Yes.
second line? That identifies who gave the information. So she should know,
So interesting.
yeah, she should know what race her children are.
But it might be she's the second one.
Right,
Those are the younger children.
right. So the younger children are Indian. The last two are Indian, but her first child is white, which says maybe that that child has a different father.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right. It's
And
her
then,
second husband.
Question?
That column with the MMSSS.
MMSS.
Married and single.
Married and single.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. The censuses are done for a purpose.
Uh-huh.
And like, why did they do these censuses? But that's not my specific question. Censuses are done primarily for the appropriation in Congress for the counties.
For the county to give money,
For
correct?
example, when they did the African American 1/5 or whatever, the African American, no representation, but that was a count for that state. So were these censuses for the Indians, the ones before this time, did they use that since they were not citizens? Were those numbers used to account for appropriation
Mhm.
or then back to the original, what were they done for?
These are part of the federal census.
Right.
So the federal government did them and they just kept looking for more information to collect for different reasons. That's where we would go back to those census reports
Right.
to find out what they were tracking.
But these Native American censuses that were done before 1930, there was there was just counting. There was no count for appropriation for Congress for like Arizona or Alabama, where they would take it. That's what I'm trying to
No,
understand.
so all of the censuses that we've talked about so far are federal censuses.
Understand? that?
Right, but
No.
you know how they use that count
Uh-huh.
to determine how many congressmen each area
Yes.
gets.
Yeah, that's
So
what I'm
if
asking.
she's
Did they use
interested in-
those censuses before 1922, did they use those numbers as part of the appropriation for the federal count?
As far as I know, because they were federal censuses, they used everything on there to help determine things at a federal level.
Yeah, and so, but the question is, like, before 24, they're not
They're not considered citizens
but they still are counted towards
because they're living in the
the
county.
congressional count, yeah.
Also, that last column is the birth state,
First state, correct.
Oklahoma,
And then
Arkansas.
Arkansas.
and then what?
It's all Arkansas.
So they're all Arkansas except the first line, which is Oklahoma.
Okay.
And then in 1940, they did supplemental questions. So over on the side for that first line, you see that line off in the white, it says supplemental question. There were certain lines that had supplemental questions that they had to answer. And this was for whites, blacks, Japanese, Chinese, American Indian, anybody who was on the census, if they were on a line that said supplemental questionnaire, they were to answer the questions on the bottom. So Martin there was selected because that's where his name fell. And so it says place of birth of your father and your mother, the mother tongue of the native language, and it says Indian. That's, yeah, he didn't say what tribe it was. He didn't say what language it was. He just said Indian. And then it asks about veteran status. So he was considered a veteran. Interesting. And then earlier they did talk about a lot of Native Americans went into World War I. The Native Americans fought for this country. Even after how badly they've been treated, they still fought for this country. In 1950, which just recently came out, they have numerous forms. So there's a P1 form that everybody filled out, and then there's a P8 form that Native Americans filled out if they lived on the reservation. So if your person lived on the reservation, they're going to have two 1950 censuses. They're going to have one on the P1 form and one on the P8 form. So we're looking here at Murphy here, the top line, says he's Indian. He's born in North Dakota, and he's widowed, and he's got his children under there, and they're all Indian. So and this is the P1 form. He also has the 4 circled. Let me go back. He has the 4 circled on his line. So there's a little bit of supplemental information for him at the bottom of the P1 form. So we go there, and it says that he is born in North Dakota. His father was North Dakota, and his mother was deceased. And he was Sioux. He was in Sioux, well, he was in Sioux County. I'm sorry, he was in Sioux County. So it just gives you a little bit of extra supplemental information about that person. Here's the P8 form. So we find him, Murphy, right there on the P8. And it says at the top, 1950 census of population of an Indian reservation schedule. He was Sioux. And then he's half-blood. And then his children are quarter blood. Now, in Native American blood quantum, they don't use science and they don't use DNA. It's if your mother's 100 and your father's 100, you're 100. If your mother's 100 and your father's a half, you're going to get half from your mother, which is a half, and you're going to get half from your father, which is a quarter. So you're 3/4 Indian. So if they're both half, then you're going to be half because you get a quarter from your mom and a quarter from your dad, so you're a half. So there is no DNA. There is no science of probability. It's whatever your parent was, cut it in half. Whatever your father was, cut it in half. And that's what your blood quantum is.
And of course, at this time, there wasn't any DNA.
There wasn't any DNA, but even so, even today, they don't take DNA to prove
Right.
your blood
I
quantum.
went to a meeting in DC a few years ago. They talked about this DNA stuff, and they said DNA does not count,
No, it doesn't.
and they don't use it to today. Your mother can DNA 100% Native American. They don't take that. They go to these rows and they look for the blood quantum that they have assigned.
They are moving away from blood quantum now and going with genealogy. I'm having to submit as much record as possible, as far back as I can with genealogy, and just leave out blood quantum altogether.
Yeah. And some tribes will take it. Some tribes I have even heard, I don't know if it's true, if they find out you as a tribe member have taken a DNA test, they will disenroll you. Because think about it. If somebody who is just like the DAR, somebody who is Native American takes a DNA test and they come back zero Native American, they're on the tribal rolls. It messes up the tribal rolls. And if they start using the DNA, then they're going to have to start letting in a lot more people. And same with the DAR. Once you're a member of DAR, even if they disprove that line that you came in on, you're still a member of DAR. So they don't want anything to do with the DNA. And some of them I have heard will disenroll you if they find out you as a tribal member have taken a DNA test.
This is the strangest thing. I listened to a lecture. This woman has blood quantum just enough to get her on whatever tribe this was. She is married to a full-blooded, nobody Indian. So her child, when the child is born, doesn't have the sufficient blood quantum. She's on the road, but they won't admit the child.
That's why they're moving to genealogy.
That's really strange.
And each tribe has their own set of rules.
Yep.
Each tribe has their own set of rules. So at this point, if there are any additional questions, kind of just to sum everything up, there are a lot of roles out there for you to look at. So look at them all. Do your research. Don't just depend on the Dawes roles, because if you're not one of the 5 civilized tribes, and I know we're in the heart of the 5 civilized tribes, but if you're not from that tribe, check the roles, because they could be on another role somewhere else. And know that there are so many other records out there besides the Dawes roles for you to go out and get. That I did a page, and I took out of a book from National Archives, 3 pages with lines about like this long, like that, down the page. I'd say probably 20 to 30 on each page, 3 pages of it, of records out of the National Archives that can have Native American records in them. So go out to the National Archives and look and see what other records are out there that they have. Whether they're online or not, they're going to at least tell you what the record is and tell you where it's located, and then you can contact that narrow location to find out about those records.
Are they all microfilm?
Some of them are on microfilm, some of them are paper. Some of them you have to go on site and get them. Some of them they will make copies of and send to you for a cost. That's where, like, I came in yesterday and I was over at the National Archives next door because I was doing World War I research for somebody. And so I was doing client work, so I had to go over there and pull the records. So I said, well, I'm going there. Let me just pull your records for you. So you can find a genealogist who will go, if they're living in that area, can go and pull them for you. Maybe a little bit less expensive than NARA. But if you can't, NARA will always pretty much pull the records unless there's some sort of law that says they can't. Like the school records. You can order the school records from the National Archives, from the residential schools. But the later you get in the years, they're not going to be able to release those because it has information about living people, and they won't release that kind of information. So they limit who has access to that.
Are most of the records in DC?
They're everywhere.
They're all scanned.
All 14 NARA websites.
They're closing down. so
Yeah,
many of
They
the
just closed New York, and over here they had railroad retirement records, and they've now moved those to Boston and Kansas City. So they're moving them all the time. Check NARA. When you find the record set on NARA, it will tell you where they're located. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the Gil Miller rule. The person had to be alive by May 28th, 1906 and apply by 1907.
Mhm.
So that does leave a gap that there could be someone who put in an application. They were alive May 28th, they put in an application and it passed away.
Right.
So is that an indication that there are people that are on there who were like, recorded whether they were approved or disallowed, but they had subsequently deceased?
Well, if they didn't turn in the application, they wouldn't be on the roll. because they had to be alive and they had to turn in their application.
Yeah, so let's say that they were alive, they turned in the application and then they died.
Okay, yeah, then they would be on the roll.
So, yeah.
It's either rejected or approved. Yes, sir.
When I went over next door for the World War I draft registration, I found I was going to look for one of my uncles because I knew that he had been in World War I. But before I got to his card, I found his older brother.
Mhm.
So I had two. And then just on a whim, I decided to look up my grandfather. And he was in there too. So I got three at first visit. And then I went home and I thought, well, if I could find my uncles, maybe I can find my uncle-in-law.
Yeah, you can find them all.
So I came back and I found two uncle-in-laws also. Now, I've got two questions, but they were for a previous presenter, but I'm going to ask you.
We have the answer.
On the spot.
President Biden apologized for the Indian schools, I believe, just this last week. Do you know anything more?
I do not. I did not watch that. I struggle with the Indian schools. I actually, September the 30th, for anybody that doesn't know, September the 30th is Remember the Children. You wear orange for the children of the Native American schools, both in Canada and the United States. And that's easy for me to remember. That's my daughter's birthday. But I got a shirt from Canada. It's beautiful. It's got feather on it where the birds are flying off, and it says Remember the Children. So just remember, next September 30th, wear an orange shirt. It doesn't have to say Remember the Children. Just wear an orange shirt in honor to remember the children of the Native American schools, because it was a horrible experience for them.
And my second question was about the Potawatomi
Okay.
Trail of Tears. I was in Danville, Illinois, and noticed the signs around town talking about the Potawatomi Trail of Tears. But on the person's slide with all the different colors of the tribes and such, Potawatomi was not on there.
They may have had their own, what they're calling Trail of Tears. And so I'm not familiar with Potawatomi, but I would Google to see if they were forcibly removed from where they were originally from and where they went to, and that may be their Trail of Tears. Like I know the Navajo moved out west. They moved from their original location to another location. They called it something else, but there are maps out there that will show you those lines. And I think there's several Trails of Tears just here in the southern states. So everybody didn't just leave from one place and go and there's one Trail of Tears. They went depending on where they came from.
I imagine the National Park Service has to.
Yes, National Park Service.
And
will
they've
have
got a
it.
great website.
Yes, absolutely.
And on the map that was shown, it did show that the various tribes went at different times.
Yep, over to Oklahoma, most of them.
So anyway, the Potawatomi, I presume, were in the Danville, Illinois area or went through that area.
Yeah, I think they were more on the East Coast, so they may have moved from the East Coast to Illinois. But I'm not real familiar with the Potawatomi to give you an educated.
But anyway, it was funneling them further west.
Yeah, they pushed all the Native Americans. And if you go to the Bureau of Indian Affairs and look at their region map, the eastern region is like from down south beyond Georgia, all the way up to beyond Virginia. Huge eastern region. There's not one reservation. There's not one Native American tribe. Everybody in that eastern region was pushed west for the Western expansion,
Except for the Eastern Band.
except for the Eastern Band.
I did notice that, I think it was in Virginia, at the Pamunkey, did have a reservation.
They might
So
have,
is that something new?
I don't know. I'm not familiar with that. I do apologize. I'm not familiar with that. There's so many tribes the best thing I can say is try to do research on that tribe and see what you can find out, their history, where they originated to where they moved to, where they were forced to move. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm talking to myself.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I want to say,
You don't think you do that?
All of the reservations, all of the Native American tribes are not nationally recognized.
Right,
Some
they are
of the
not.
local State recognized.
there are some state. Yeah, absolutely.
There's some that are not even state recognized.
But I do want to say Miigwech, which is Anishinaabe for thank you, to both the Georgia State Archives and to everybody who took time out on their Saturday to come hear the great four presenters who did present today.